late this morning. Just about time to get started. Welcome to all of you who are with us online. If we can get the hall class to move to the hall, we will get started. Good to have Mike Smith back vertical and with us this morning.
I've been seeing my chair vacant here for a while.
The little sign up on the screen has nothing at all to do with the class. I just happened to come across it, and I thought it was a really good example. I just can't imagine somebody who is trying to learn English and you're trying to explain to them what this sentence means. I don't know how anybody ever learns English who isn't born here and grows up hearing it all their life.
Well, and then all the words we substitute.
Yeah, all the substituted words. I don't know if you saw the notice in the news this week, if you keep up with those sorts of things, but the new latest iteration of your iPhone and your Android phones, if you have the latest earbuds, the new software that's coming out is going to allow you to speak to someone who also has the earbuds and the software. I can speak in English, and you can hear it instantly in Spanish or Chinese or German or French. And you can speak in whatever language you speak, and I will instantly hear it in English. I just think that's... All I could think of is, hey, welcome to the Tower of Babel. We have come full circle. Well, we have been in the Garden of Gethsemane for some time now, and we're now leaving the garden. As you know, we will be under duress. They will be taking Jesus into captivity, and we will be beginning the series of trials, most of which were a mockery, as we move forward in the story. Just a few thoughts to kind of wrap up the Gethsemane event. And this is where we left off last week. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy or exhausted from sorrow. So he left them there and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. And then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." It's interesting that he said the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Into whose hands was he delivered? The Jewish leaders. Of course, it was the temple guard, and I don't know if there were Roman soldiers. It was a large group of soldiers, as we'll see in a minute, that were there. I don't know how many of them were temple guards and Jewish soldiers, and how many of them were Roman soldiers. There were a ton of them. But he uses this one phrase to cover the whole audience. And this would include your priests and your rabbis and your leading religious leaders among the Jewish people. And he calls them sinners because they have missed the mark in understanding who he is and what he has come to do. There's a few of the phrases that we've had here in the garden that have entered into our speech as axioms, as common phrases that we hear in many different situations. You'll hear somebody who's under, really a lot of stress and say, "Boy, I was just sweating bullets," or "I was sweating blood." Comes from here. "Not my will, but thine be done." How many sermons have been preached on that? And then one that I've used a lot, and probably you have too, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." When we do something, we know we're not supposed to, we kind of slough it off and say, "Well, it wasn't what I wanted to do, but, spirit's willing, flesh is weak." Some of the lessons from Gethsemane, these are some that I gathered, and maybe you'll have some that you can add to it also. When you're deeply troubled, what do you want to do? Well, what Jesus did, take it to God. When you're in a state of crisis, a good place to begin with prayer. I think a lot of times we think that and we remember that and we do that in times of crisis, but sometimes maybe we let other things block that out. But that is certainly appropriate to always be the first line of defense. Certainly what Jesus demonstrates here is that God's will is above our will, even when it's very, very costly. And he paid the ultimate physical price to allow God's will to have rule and reign in his life. Spiritual strength comes through watchfulness. Watch and pray, he told the disciples. And we should not be terribly surprised, disappointed, yes, but not surprised, when those that we think would be the very last ones to disappoint and desert us are in fact the ones that do. And we see this certainly in the aftermath of Gethsemane, as eventually all of the apostles will run away. Obedience requires preparation. I think that the whole Garden of Gethsemane experience is the ultimate preparation for what is going to happen the rest of that day. The trials, the abuse, the physical abuse, and finally, of course, the crucifixion. But the garden is where the victory was won. The garden is where he acquired the strength and the power and the determination and the will to patiently endure the rest of it. Surrender doesn't remove suffering, but it transforms it. And of course, Jesus is the ultimate example of that. Just a couple more. Be honest with God. Jesus poured out his sorrow. He poured out his fear. He didn't hold anything back. He pleaded diligently for his point of view, for his desire, for his need, even though it ended up with not my will, but thine be done. Pray first and then act later. And before the cross, he came to God in the most intense period of prayer. Surrender your will. It's the heart of discipleship, and one of the hardest things that we sometimes have to do, isn't it? Because it's not what we want to do, and it's certainly not always the easiest thing to do. When we know that what we're doing is not in line with the will of God, but we say, not my will, but yours. And then finally, stay spiritually awake, watch and pray, so that you won't be overcome by temptation. Those are some that I had thought of and some that I had gathered from some of the internet programs. Anybody want to add anything else? Anything else come to mind that these don't encompass, or to expound on any of these?
You mentioned surrendering our will. When you started that and going to prayer, the first thing I thought of that just jumped in, probably, and this may just be me, but it seems like 90% of the time when we take our prayers to God, what we want, we totally leave that part off about surrendering, your will, this is what I want, but we say, this is what I want. And we kind of leave it there. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I have a feeling I might not be.
You might not be. But I grew up hearing that in the public prayer. That was just almost a formula part of the public prayer in our Sunday morning gatherings in the little church where I grew up. But yeah, you're right. It's not always our first thought. Anybody else?
We're supposed to pray.
It's all right.
We're supposed to pray when we're in the car and anytime we're driving, we're supposed to give thanks to the Lord, and we're supposed to continue to pray and daily.
Absolutely, and especially if you're driving in Houston, huh?
Especially if you're driving in Houston and you don't even know where you're even going.
It's a good time to pray. Thank you, Jeff. All right, so to our text. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a cohort. Some translations say detachment. Some say band of soldiers, and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. That's a lot. A cohort is about 600 soldiers. Now, some of us have been there, and I don't know if the place they call the location is exactly where it was, but it's certainly in the area where it was. It was there on the foot of the Mount of Olives. And wherever it was, 600 soldiers is going to be massive, massive overkill. It's a small area. They could easily surround the whole Garden of Gethsemane several times deep with 600 soldiers. So this is it's got to be a chaotic situation. They were carrying torches and lanterns and weapons. I can't even imagine what it sounded like and smelled like with all of that. Of course, you know, this is in the middle of the night. All of these things are happening here in the dark of the night. And it's just hard to visualize what this looked like when they came to take Jesus. Now, the betrayer, Judas, had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man, arrest him and lead him away under guard. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. And no idea why that was the selected signal. Obviously, that had been prearranged with the Jewish leaders that's the way that he would identify him, and it's just not what I would have expected. I guess if I were writing the novel, that's not the way it would have played out, but that's the way he did it. We talked a little bit about why Judas did it, and we'll list a few things again quickly, but why did they even need Judas? I mean, Jesus had been in the temple area days, and he had been in Jerusalem, in and out of Jerusalem, all of his life. Why do you think they even needed Judas to betray him? I think one thing, they didn't know exactly where he would be at any given time. And if you got 600 soldiers lined up, you need to know where you're going, right? So Judas was familiar with Jesus, with the places he went. And Scripture said that, you know, Jesus was at a place where Judas knew that he had often been with them. So it was a familiar place to him. Maybe they needed, I know, you know, in law today, and I'm just theorizing here, but in law today, in order to bring a charge against somebody, you need somebody to bring a charge. If somebody does something to you, you have to say, I'm bringing a charge against that person for them to prosecute him. So maybe Judas was that guy. Maybe he was the technical guy that made it possible for them to go ahead and initiate the trials that he's getting ready to go through. I'm not sure, you have any other thoughts on why they needed Judas? Of course, we know he ended up being the fulfillment of prophecy. But from a Jewish perspective, I don't know exactly beyond that why they really needed him. But they did. Obviously, they paid him a handsome sum of money to do it.
Well, the Scripture tells us that the authorities were afraid to arrest him in public because they would have a rebellion with the people. And I would imagine that they needed Judas because it would have been, a lot of people would not have been able to identify him. I mean, everybody had beards, a lot of the men had beards and long hair, and it would have been difficult for, especially the Roman soldiers, to know which of the 12 to arrest. So,
Yeah, plus the fact that it was dark. It was dark.
Yeah.
It was night.
yeah.
So, there could easily be a lot of confusion going on.
I thought he was going to say what was on my mind with the people around in the fear of rebellion for going against Jesus, having somebody that's a betrayer from his group confirms there, and it also confirms a doubt in others that may be looking on from the group that something might be wrong. So it may be a confirmation that what they're doing is right, that they wanted.
Yeah. And of course, also to that same point, the reason they didn't want to create a big public spectacle of this, and the reason they went in the dark of the night was just not to create a disturbance among the Jews, but primarily the reason they didn't want to create a disturbance among the Jews was because that would bring the Romans down on them. And the Romans didn't like discord. They wanted everything kept peacefully and quietly. And so that's a major reason why they tried to keep it out of the city and as quiet as they could, even though, 600 soldiers is not very quiet. But anyway, they didn't have to be practical. So some of the reasons, and we've talked about some of these before, and we won't dwell on it very much. The one thing that if you're watching The Chosen, they make a pretty big storyline out of the possibility that Judas really believed Jesus was the Messiah, but his idea of the Messiah was someone who would come and sit on David's throne and rule over Israel. And they create the storyline, and theologians have brought this forward. I have no idea if it's true or not, that Judas was impatient and discouraged that Jesus wasn't moving the process forward. He wanted him to get on with taking over physically the reign over Israel. And that he had the idea that he could force his hand by creating a situation where he would be required to go ahead and assert his authority. Now, that's kind of what this is saying. His disillusionment with Jesus' mission. He had a different agenda. His was secular. It was the overthrow of Rome and the dominance of Israel. And there's some evidence that some people think, and I can't prove this either, that if he was not a zealot himself, he was at least sympathetic to the zealot cause. And of course, the zealots were those who were ready to rise up right now and go to war against Rome, retake the authority and control over Israel. So, is that right or wrong? I don't know. It's kind of a way of making it a little less grievous that he had a motive that was, at least in his mind, justified. Now, of course, we're going to learn later on, of course, that when all this fell apart, his solution for himself was to go and hang himself. So I don't know how that plays into this kind of a theory about why he did it. We could probably, from a surface level at least, say that he did it for the money. He was a greedy person. We know this from several occasions. He desired material gain. He took the 30 pieces of silver. He was the keeper of the bag, and we know that he was a thief. And, when we had the story of Mary anointing Jesus with the expensive oil, he criticized her for that. It was wasted. We could have taken that and given it to the poor. Of course, he wasn't interested in the poor. But so, whatever else may have been his justification, that was certainly true of him. Some have suggested that he simply had a lack of true faith or belief in Jesus' divinity. We have not nearly all of the recordings of all of the conversations that went on with Jesus and the apostles, but of the ones that we have, most of the apostles who we have recorded what they said to Jesus and how they addressed Jesus, yes, they might call him rabbi, but they also called him Lord. And they acknowledged his divinity. We don't have a record of Judas ever doing that. And even when he came with the kiss to betray Jesus, what did he say? Rabbi, teacher. Rabbi is not divinity. Rabbi is not divine. That's a secular, it's just like saying teacher. I don't know. We do know that he was demonically possessed. We're told by a couple of the different gospel writers that Satan entered into him. So that certainly was a factor. We also know that this had to happen to fulfill prophecy. It didn't have to be Judas, but it had to happen. If it hadn't been Judas, it would have been someone else. Psalm 41:9 talks about being betrayed by a friend. And then Zechariah 11 talks about being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Maybe he was just a broken and weak person. Augustine said that this illustrates how pride, sin, and neglect of grace can gradually harden the heart of anyone. Those are some of the reasons that I had kind of come up with. Would anybody like to add any other ideas about why Judas felt that he needed to betray Jesus? Okay. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. Your translation says, "I am he," and Judas the traitor was standing there with him. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. There's a couple of things here. In the text, in the manuscripts, the word "he" is not included. It's something that the translators have put in to make it sound right in English. They do this. This is common practice, and it's necessary in most instances for the syntax to be right, for it to sound right in English. They add words as is necessary. I'm not sure that's what he said. I think he may very well have said, "I am." And the reason I say that is, what is that? What is "I am"?
God.
That goes back to the burning bush. And they would have known that immediately. This is more than, yes, I'm the guy. No. It's what we roughly call Yahweh. It's "I am." It's what he answered Moses when Moses said, "Who shall I say sent me?" And he said, "Tell them I am. Tell them I am sent you." Why did they fall back? Well, I don't know the answer to that either, but those who were maybe the Jewish faith, who were there standing close enough to hear him say this, that would have been pretty jarring. This guy has just spoken the unspeakable word, "I am." Now, why they fell back, I don't know. This is it's just almost bizarre. All of these soldiers here, and they come up and they say, "Who are you looking for?" "We're looking for Jesus." "I am." Bam. Down they go. And then they get up and arrest him.
Sort of like in The Chosen where they make up. I was part of a pageant once, and they had all the soldiers. And of course, they had like a thunderous roar or whatever, and they had all the soldiers and everybody fall down. And it was the idea that I have all the power I need, and like a heavenly miracle almost, that they're basically thrown down. And then he went with them peacefully to show I could have had you, but I didn't.
Yep. Why did they fall down? Anybody else have an idea? Well, as we said, some of them may have been could have been overwhelmed by hearing somebody, actually a human, stand there and pronounce the divine name. Soldiers may have expected an ordinary man to identify him, but instead they were confronted with the divine name, which carries inherent authority and power. I don't know if that was enough to do that or not. Their falling back could be a physical reaction to the weight of that revelation. That's been some theory about it. At the very least, as Mike said, it was a definite display of Jesus' authority. Hey guys, you think you got me, but you don't. You think you're in control, but you're not. Jesus is the one in control of the situation. He is not being overpowered. He is allowing it of his own free will. And John had recorded him saying this earlier in John chapter 10. No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. Maybe it was just a way of God showing a little foretaste of what's coming in the future. Every knee will bow in heaven and on earth, and every tongue confess when we stand before the great white throne. I don't know. It's just I don't know how they'll deal with this in The Chosen. I'm anxious to see what they do, if they do. But it's just a very unexpected and bizarre situation. What happens when an angel shows up? First thing that happens, you go down. Every time in the Old Testament and the New Testament both, when an angel shows up, bam. These were professional soldiers, strong and disciplined, but in that moment, they clapped before a single, unarmed man. Shows a contrast between human power, weapons, the authority of Rome and the temple garden, and the divine presence. Again, they ask him, and as we go through here, I'll remind you now, some of this is going to be a bit choppy, and in some places it's going to be a little disjointed because we're doing the correlating of all of the four Gospels. So we're following F. LaGard Smith's version of his way of trying to merge all four Gospels into one continual story. So it gets a little choppy sometime, and you won't be able to read this text exactly in any one of your Gospels, just if you try to look for that. Again, he asked him, "Who is it you want?" Jesus of Nazareth, they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he." Again, the he's not there. I told you that I am. If you're looking for me, let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. I have not lost one of those you gave me. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels, legion. A legion is like, forgotten the exact number. Divide 72,000 by 12, and you'll know how much a legion is. 12 legions is about 72,000 angels. How many angels do you think it would have taken to accomplish that? One would have been an overkill. One would have been more than enough. And Jesus said, you think 72,000? Talk about hyperbole. But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way? But Jesus answered, no more of this, and he touched the man's ear and healed him. I've talked about this before, but that I would have just loved to have been a fly on the wall at Malchus's house. When he went home after his midnight shift, got home and his wife probably had breakfast waiting for him. And she said, well, Malchus, how was your night? Yeah, well, yeah, it was kind of interesting. Well, what was interesting? Well, this guy cut my ear off. Malchus, I don't see any blood, and you got 2 ears. Well, yeah. This guy touched it and healed it. I'd imagine she's trying to figure out how much hay I had to drink that night. I don't know. But I think, it's kind of, I guess that ear was still out there on the ground somewhere, because Jesus didn't pick up the ear and put it back on. He just touched his head and the ear regenerated itself. It'll be interesting to see what the chosen does with that if they choose to do anything. It'll be fun. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard and the elders who had come for him, am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. Then the detachment of soldiers with his commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. What do you think if you had been one of the 12 there and there was these 600 soldiers around and all of the commotion that's going on, and now they've got Jesus and they've bound him and have taken him into custody? What are you going to do? Probably the same thing, right? Probably time to get out of the garden. Time to go find an upper room that you can lock the doors. Who do you think that young man was that they seized and ran off naked? Any ideas? I don't know either, but there is some theory about it. It's kind of strange that it would even be reported in the gospel. That's not the sort of thing that you usually see reported in scriptural writings. Do you happen to remember who reported it? It was in the Gospel of Mark, John Mark. There are some people who believe, like John, when he wrote about himself, he always spoke of himself in the third person, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Some people have theorized that the guy was Mark. I have no idea. I don't know if Mark even ever met Jesus or not. He was Peter's friend, but I don't know if he came on the scene after Jesus was ascended or not. But anyway, that's not on the test, so you don't have to remember it. So Jesus is now arrested and is still in the very dark of the night, the very early hours of following midnight. And the first thing they're going to do is take him to Annas. And I think I have a little progression here just to get all of it in your mind, and then we'll see it again as we go through the scripture. But this is kind of the way that the night unfolded. Pretty much everything they did under the darkness of night was illegal under Jewish law. And maybe we'll put together a little list of some of the things that were illegal. First off, he was taken to Annas. Annas had been the high priest from about 6 AD to 15 AD. Who served as high priests? Who was eligible to be high priests? Levites. And not only Levites, but descendants of Aaron. So any Levite could serve as a priest, and they did. They took turns serving as priests in the temple. John the Baptist's father was a Levite and a priest that served in the temple for a few weeks. They rotated through that. But to be the high priest, you needed to be a descendant of Aaron. Well, that all went by the wayside somewhere along in the Babylonian captivity, and by the time we get to Jesus' time, the high priest office was dictated and controlled by the Roman government. It was one of the ways that they had of keeping control of the people. And they would put high priests in for a period of time and then intentionally move them, not because they did anything wrong, but just so that they didn't become more powerful in the eyes of the people than they wanted them to be. So Annas has been appointed by the Roman government to serve as high priest, and then he was deposed. He was moved out by the Roman procurator Gratus, and he had 5 sons, and in each one of those sons, over the next several years, would serve some period of time as a high priest. But at the time of Jesus' trial, Annas has already been deposed, but the person who has taken his place is not one of his sons, but rather his son-in-law. So Caiaphas is now the high priest. The fact that they took him first to Annas before they did to Caiaphas is a strong indication of how much influence Annas still has among the people of the Sanhedrin. So maybe he's a high priest emeritus, if you will, but they give him great respect, and they show that respect by taking Jesus to him first of all. So next after that, he is taken to Caiaphas, the son-in-law of Annas, the current high priest. The high priest also presides over the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, you know, is the ruling group of the Jewish people. It's the kind of the Supreme Court of Israel. It's 71 of the elders. Most of them are Sadducees, not necessarily all of them, but there was a predominance of the Sadducees who sat on the Supreme Court, on the Sanhedrin. Some of the Sanhedrin will gather at Caiaphas' house, not the whole group yet, but they will gather to interrogate him regarding his claims of messiahship, and we'll see that as we go through the text, and they turn pretty ugly before it's over. And this is still under cover of darkness. And then finally, as the day is dawning, they will summons the entire Sanhedrin, and then they will officially pronounce condemnation on Jesus. So that's where we're going to be picking up. I won't be here next week. We're going to Fort Worth to do our next Praise and Harmony recording. And the following week, I've asked Kevin Montgomery to fill in for me. I should be back, but I thought you all might need a break about then. So after that, then we'll come back and we'll pick up here with the progression of trials that they're going to subject Jesus to on his way to ultimate crucifixion. So thank you so much. Our time is up. Have a wonderful, God-blessed week.